Welcome back to Collecting Modern Classic Cars, and in this video I'm going to give you driving impressions behind the wheel of this, the Lexus LS400. But before we get started, it's probably important to try and get some context what the market was like back when this car was launched, 1989, 1990. So the classic car market, no, it wasn't classic car, the luxury car market at the time was a relatively simplistic place. The formula was fairly simple: big saloon car, big petrol engines, automatic gearbox, nice soft ride, lots of leather and wood. And the German and British manufacturers really had this market to themselves, completely stitched up. If you wanted to buy a luxury saloon car back in the day, you gave your money to Mercedes, BMW, Jaguar, to a lesser degree Audi. They really hadn't established too strong a foothold in this market at the time. Or if you had quite a bit of money, then you might have given it to either Rolls-Royce or Bentley, but that was about it. There was no real credible alternative from anybody else. The Japanese manufacturers at the time, well, they were known for building very reliable, safe, solid hatchbacks, family cars. They certainly weren't known for building luxury saloons, and the idea that the Japanese could take on the European established brands was almost unthinkable. But nobody told Toyota that, and out came the Lexus LS400. And the motoring press, usually a very hard bunch to impress, were gobsmacked. Out of nowhere, this Japanese upstart suddenly started winning group tests against the establishment. I collect modern classic car magazines, and I was reading an article the other night where Car Magazine pitched the then new LS400 against a Rolls-Royce, and it comprehensively beat it, and that sort of thing was a real surprise. Back in the late 80s, early 90s, cars were really about evolution rather than revolution. People like BMW and Mercedes had been making 7 Series and S classes respectively for quite some time, each new generation being a sort of a refresh of the recipe to date. Of course, Lexus had none of that. This was a clean sheet of paper, with Toyota board providing unlimited resources, both in terms of time, money and manpower, to create one of the most luxurious cars available at the time. And they really succeeded. There's no doubt, if you were buying an LS400, particularly in the UK, slightly different if you were a US buyer, but if you were buying a Lexus in the UK, you were taking a real leap of faith. You were doing something that your peers didn't do. This was a car that you wouldn't necessarily park in the golf club car park and coo about owning. But it certainly didn't take much time from behind the wheel to realise that you were making a very, very considered choice. In the States, the car was an absolute rip-roaring success. Buyers there lapping up examples for their comfort, refinement, and naturally longevity. We'll talk a little bit about that shortly. Here in the UK, the car sold well. Perhaps buyers here, being slightly more brand conscious, felt that buying into a new brand, or more specifically one that was really just a premium, it wasn't just, but people could perceive it as just a premium Toyota, was a little harder to swallow. And indeed there are Toyota stamps here and there throughout the car. There's not that many, but there are parts, in particularly under the engine bay, stamped with Toyota, and the VIN plate says Toyota Motor Company, etc. So if you were concerned about that sort of thing, there were areas of the car that would trigger those sorts of concerns. But for those that took the plunge, they really were getting an exceptional motor car. But all that was 30 years ago, and of course time has moved on, technology has moved on, people's expectations have moved on, and every example of the LS400 has moved on, in as much as they've all covered mileage now. So in 2022, is the car still relevant? Can it still cut the mustard? Is it still a car that you should buy? Is it still a car that you can enjoy? Let's find out. In many respects, the recipe for the car was very similar to what the others were producing. This is a relatively long wheelbase saloon, albeit that it was only ever available in one wheelbase, unlike particularly its German peers. In fact, all of its peers. You could generally order a standard and a long wheelbase version. In the LS400, you just had one wheelbase. There's ample room, as we'll get into. Up front was a big V8 engine. The car was only available with an automatic gearbox. Leather, wood, tick, tick, tick. But the depths that the Lexus engineers went into when creating the car were frankly staggering. The engine, gearbox, mounts, a hydraulic, just to effectively detach the drivetrain from the body and insulate it from noise and vibration. When you open the door of one of these cars and you see the extent of the door seals, you suddenly realise just how extensively they engineered the car to be as quiet as it is. Lexus took 2 years to choose the exact heights that they wanted to swathe the cabin in. Little details perhaps, but they knew they had one real chance to crack the market and to be taken seriously, and they weren't taking anything to chance. The overarching driving experience is one of comfort. If you had to sort of pigeonhole the driving experience, it's wafty comfort. Noise insulation is absolutely superb. You could hear a pin drop in the cabin. At a constant 70 miles an hour cruise on a smooth piece of motorway tarmac, the car only emits 67 to 68 decibels of cabin noise. To put that into some level of context, our Renault Safran is sort of 68 to 70 decibels, and our E46 BMW 3 Series Coupe 78 to 80 decibels. So that 10 decibel drop between the BMW and the Lexus is substantial. You really do notice it. So on a motorway cruise, you can practically whisper to your passenger. It's just as well that the cabin is so well built. In this near 200,000 mile example, there isn't a single squeak, rattle or untoward noise in the cabin. If I stop talking for a second, you should see we're just on a broken A road at the minute. It's just nothing. Lexus really did screw these cars together very, very well. So the ride comfort, I'd say that's pretty much on a par with anything I've ever driven, really. If I had to pick one car, I don't know, I've had quite a few luxury cars over the years. If I had to pick one car that probably bested this one for ride comfort, it would be the Bentley Arnage T. There's just a level of plushness to that. I've just elevated it slightly above this car. But then you're talking about a Bentley that was 5 times the cost of this Lexus, so it's not quite comparing apples with apples. But certainly the ride comfort in this car is better than a BMW 7 Series, better than a W126 Mercedes, very similar to a Jaguar XJ of the period. What you don't get with one of these though is wallow. So despite the very soft spring rates and damper rates, the car doesn't wallow or wander around the road. You can drive it with your fingertips. The car will just drive absolutely dead straight. No histrionics, no problems. Steering in this particular example is slightly heavy. Not sure why that should be, but it lends a certain sense of weight to the car. The car doesn't feel particularly heavy or cumbersome round corners. Of course, it wasn't built to be a sports car, so we're not expecting BMW M5 levels of agility here. Nor do we get a sense that we're going to fall out of the car when we're cornering. One of the finest elements of the car, for me certainly, is the engine. It's not quite a Jekyll and Hyde engine in the way that a Honda Type R engine might be, but there are certainly 2 elements to its performance. On the one hand, at a cruise like we're doing now, the car is absolutely whisper quiet and smooth. There's almost no vibration. In fact, at idle, you simply cannot tell that the engine is running, either through vibration or noise. You have to look either at the rev counter or stab away at the throttle to tell. But at a steady cruise like this, we're doing 45 miles an hour now. Just can't hear the engine at all. And that's the same until you get to about half throttle, at which point you start to get a lovely V8 rumble coming through. If you don't want it, you use less than half throttle. It's never intrusive, it's just a sort of powerful sound to let you know that the power's there if you want it. But get the car above 4,500 revs and there's a renewed vigour to the power delivery. As I say, it's not a VTEC kick, it's just a noticeable livening up of the performance of the car, and it really does lunge for the red line, which on this car starts at 6,250 revs. In reality, there's absolutely no need to ever go there, but neither is there any concern at doing so. The car stays turbine smooth, whatever the revs, and it is actually a pleasurable car to rev out. £260 of torque, delivered at 4,000 or 4,500 revs, depending on the model that the particular year version model that you're driving, is actually quite high for a luxury car. You might expect peak torque to be delivered just a bit lower than that, maybe 3,500 revs, but the car never feels like it's torque light, like there's a lack of low down grunt. It's not quite any gear, any revs, but yeah, the engine is really well suited to the car, and you never feel like you need more than the 260 horsepower that this particular example gives out. I've got to say, if you were to ask me what sort of horsepower the car had without me knowing the actual stats of the car, look at that, fabulous. Like a good roller, don't we? That was a very nice looking example, actually. Yeah, sorry, if you were asking me to guess the horsepower of this car, not knowing the stats, I would easily say 280 horsepower. Perhaps Lexus understated the cars. Power outputs from the factory, maybe not, but certainly this car's fit and healthy. All the horses are still in the stable. The gearbox is really well suited to the engine. So it's actually a very clever gearbox. The power to the engine is actually interrupted ever so slightly when the car changes gear, and Lexus did that just to get that extra level of refinement in the gear change. It's a 4-speed Slushmatic auto. There's no dual clutch tomfoolery going on here. The car does have a sport mode. It's not really in keeping with this sort of car, but yeah, there is one. Press the sport mode, or PWR button as it's labelled, presumably for power, and the car will kick down a bit earlier. Gearbox feels a bit livelier, and it will hold on to the gears a bit longer. Doesn't actually increase the horsepower of the car, of the engine, it just makes the car feel a touch livelier. Day-to-day driving, you'll just never go anywhere near the button. It's not necessary, but it is there. The other thing you can do with the gearbox is you can lock it into either third, second or first as you see fit. So if you were driving on an A road, for instance, behind a tractor and HGV waiting for a gap in the traffic, you can change the gears, lock it into whatever gear of your choice. And then that takes out the need for the gearbox to kick down when you want to get going. Again, not something you'll use in day-to-day driving, I wouldn't have thought, but the feature is there nevertheless. So, slightly different angle. I wouldn't normally do a video from the back of the car, but given that the brief for the LS400 was to chauffeur around the great and the good, the captains of industry of this world, sort of makes sense to see what it's like here in the back. It's very nice. Very nice. There's acres of legroom. As I said, the LS400 only ever came in one size or one wheelbase. It was never a long wheelbase version. The car doesn't need it in the slightest. Noise is really well suppressed. The seats are super comfy in the back actually. I mean, this car's clearly not been sat in too much in the rear. The seats are lovely and supple. It's very bright back here as well. The large glass house that is a benefit when you're in the driver's seat benefits the rear passengers as well, helped by the glass electric sunroof, so there's lots and lots of light in the cabin. I can see out very well. Yeah, I could spend quite a bit of time back here. It's quite nice. The hand pulls here are covered in leather, stitched really nicely on the back, really supple, soft leather stitched nicely on the back. I've got a coat hook here, my own personal reading light, a light here which will come on with the main illumination. I've got heated seats in the back, cup holders, some storage here. Some sort of lock, I don't really know what that does. Yeah. Lovely soft buttery leather. Very pleasant. I can see the speedo very easily from here, so I can tell my driver to speed up so I can get to my next important meeting where I can rah 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 at people. It isn't particularly laden with gadgets back here, but you've got everything that you need. One thing that would be nice, although I accept this might have been a feature on more modern cars, is the ability to move the passenger seat forward. In my LS600 long wheelbase, I could move this seat electrically with items in here. I could also change things like the stereo functions. I could change the heating actually. I could change. So yeah, but that was a much more modern car. I've got to keep remembering that this was a car conceived in the 1980s, effectively delivered in the 1990s. The backrest padding's lovely actually. It's really supple backrest padding. I can also confirm that the heated seat actually works. Lovely and toasty. Something I do like about this car now that I certainly didn't appreciate at the time when the car was launched, albeit I was a teenager at the time, so what did I know about cars? But actually I knew quite a lot about cars. They were a hobby of mine to read up. I got all the magazines, read all the reviews. So actually I was quite a knowledgeable teenager, but of course, what do you know until you actually get driving? But yeah, when this car was launched, it was quite there was a lack of ostentationness about it, and I could understand that if you were a luxury car buyer and you wanted your neighbours or your fellow golf club members to know that you'd spent quite a lot of money on a car, then you probably wanted lots of chrome and bit of glitz and bling and all of that sort of stuff, and probably a German or British badge on the front of your car. But this car had practically none of that. It was quite simple in its choice of materials. Everything's quite simple and clear, and yeah, there's no glitz in here, and I'd like that now. It was one of the things that I thought was missing from the package when Lexus first brought this car out. But I now totally get it, totally get it. So as you waft down the road today in one of these, it's almost a classless car. People have they can't judge you based on driving around in an old LS400. The one thing they can tell is that you're not new money. But are you driving around in an LS400 because you just needed a cheap car and that was where your budget was at? Or are you some multi-millionaire landowner? You know, this is an old money car after all. Me, I just like them. I'm neither of those two things. I just like them. I like modern classic cars, and I have a huge respect for the LS400. But I like the fact that people can't quite judge you on your choice of vehicle. It's a bit like driving an old Land Rover Defender. I've got one of those as well. Are you a farmer? Who are you if you drive around in an old Defender? Hopefully you can hear now. There's absolutely no noise in the cabin. Can't tell the engine's running. So peaceful. Sadly, many of the older LS400s have been and continue to be broken for their engines. There is a scene out there that likes to take V8 engines and turbocharge them, fit them in drift cars, that sort of thing. It's a crying shame if we lose our LS400s in that manner, because they've still got a lot to give. There are examples out there with more than 500,000 miles on the clock still giving reliable, solid service. There are a couple of famous cars in the US that have done more than 1 million miles. Typically on original engines and gearboxes. Engines. I'd love to do something similar with this car, but since lockdown our mileage has reduced considerably, and this will be a very classic car by the time I would have the opportunity to add that many miles on. But I'm hoping to do at least 250,000 miles in this car, or to get this car to the 250,000 mile marker, so another 50,000 miles to go. That would be nice. We shall see. One of the things I would say is that although this is a modern classic car, you have to make very few concessions if you want to just jump in and use this car. It would make an absolutely fantastic daily driver, and a depreciation proof one at that. This particular car has central locking, but you use it off a key, but it works absolutely fine. The car's aircon system is absolutely fantastic. The ventilation, very, very impressive. The car doesn't steam up, it doesn't leak water or any of those sorts of things. As I say, it's quiet, supremely comfortable. It's easy to see out of. There's lots and lots of glass, as there is on lots of 1980s and 1990s cars. It's not the easiest car in the world to park. This car doesn't have parking sensors, front or back. Having said that, the front of the car is easy to spot. You can see the corners. The boot out of the back window, you can see none of it. You know there's quite an expansive boot back there, but you can't see any of it. Hence this car's aftermarket rear view camera, which actually is very, very effective. It's a little long for your average supermarket car parking space. It does tend to stick out just a little bit. To be fair, that would be no different in a 7 Series or S-Class or Audi A8. It's just a function of what the car was designed to do and therefore its size. But it's very easy to drive. It's very easy to drive. The boot is a decent size. Plenty of room for shopping. Rear leg room is superb. The seat comfort is very good. You do tend to feel like you're sat on top of the seat a little. I used the phrase cocoon when I was talking about our Renault Safran. The Lexus's seats aren't cocooning, they're very supple, they're soft, they're comfortable, but they aren't particularly supportive. If you were to corner this car in a spirited fashion, something I've never done, then there's a chance that certainly as a passenger you might just slip out of the seat. So if you were considering one of these cars as a daily driver, what areas could you improve to assist practicality? Not so many really. The headlights are rubbish. They're of their period. They're, when you're used to modern xenons and now laser lights in cars these days, these feel a little bit like candles at night. There's nothing wrong with them per se. As I say, they are of their time, but they're not up to 2022 standards, so you could fit maybe an HID kit or upgrade the headlights. The car doesn't have Bluetooth. In many respects that should be obvious, but if you're not used to cars of this sort of era, it is worth pointing out. So you will need some sort of system in order to be able to make and take phone calls. The slightly later cars had sat-nav. They had a screen in the dash with sat-nav. These slightly earlier cars, Mark 1, 2s and 3s, don't have that. I'm not sure it's something you would seek out. I don't think you'd choose a Mark 4 car because of the sat-nav system, because at the end of the day it would still be 20 years old, and a modern Garmin or TomTom or even your phone would just do a much better job. So there's no sat-nav, there's no Bluetooth, the headlights aren't particularly amazing, and there aren't some of the modern electronic driver aids like lane assist and that sort of thing. But if you need that, really, yeah. And there's no parking sensors, but as I say, this car's got a aftermarket system, works perfectly well. Yeah, and that's about it. There's a couple of silly little niggles. They're almost not worth mentioning, but I will. Like the remote boot release, which is inside the car down here, won't work when the engine's running. So if you go to the supermarket, engine's still running, and you want to let your passenger out to grab some bags or something out of the boot, you have to turn the engine off to get the boot open. And when you get back to the car with your shopping, you either have to use the little lever in here or literally put the key in the boot lock and open it, which is a bit old school. But I think that's about it. You put modern, just modern E10 95 RON fuel in the car. You don't need to put super unleaded in. They really are very, very easy to use as a daily driver. Oh, it even has cup holders. There's two here that fold out from the storage box here. Don't know whether you can see, but there are two fixed cup holders in the armrest in the rear of the car. There's plenty of storage. There's storage bins in both door pockets. There's a large storage bin here underneath the central armrest. There's a good sized glove box. And there's storage next to the 6-disc changer, which is above the glove box, where you'd store your CDs, etc. Not sure if this is quite coming out on camera, but it's a shame if it isn't, of just how serene this car is to waft down the road in. It literally just almost drives itself down the road. There's no noise, no effort needed. It's so calm and relaxing in here. You could do some serious miles in one of these cars and get out feeling really, really refreshed. In terms of ergonomics, this car is very, very good indeed. Everything is to hand where you'd pretty much expect it to be. Unlike many Japanese cars, the indicator stalk is on the left-hand side. So if you're used to driving German cars, as I am, the indicator's in the correct place. Nothing's a major reach away. The dials are just so easy to read. Yeah, really, really good. Quick fraction of a second glance and you see exactly what speed you're doing. If you are going to do some distance in one of these cars, particular note goes out to the stereo system. I know Lexus more recently are famed for their Mark Levinson stereos, but this early car, has a superb stereo system. One thing the car doesn't have is an onboard computer as such. There's a trip computer as you get in any car, but there's no function within the car that tells you your average speed, the miles left, fuel left in the tank, or your MPG. It's all just very simple. There is everything you need, but nothing superfluous. Whilst it's too early to talk about reliability of this particular example, one thing I will say is that pretty much everything in the car works as it should. All of the electric windows, the electric sunroof. That's a particular nervous time when you open the electric sunroof in a new acquisition for the first time, or more specifically when you try and close the sunroof in your new acquisition for the first time and wonder whether it will stay open. You have to get the gaffer tape and plastic bags out, but pretty much everything in here works. One of the weaker points, or one of the failure points of these cars tends to be the electric steering column. This car has an electric steering column that moves towards you. And when you first put the key in the ignition, the column will move to its preset position. When you take the key out, the column will move away from you to allow for the big businessman's stomach to egress the vehicle. It is a failure point in this car. It works absolutely fine. The only things I've found that don't work is the driver's heated seat. I don't know why that should be. I haven't even looked to see if there's a fuse out yet, but the driver's heated seat doesn't work. The electric adjustment does. It says. And doesn't work. Yeah, unheated seat, that's not bad going. I'll take that. One of the feel-good factors of these cars, I think, is the fact that you almost feel like you're cheating the system. When you drive one, it's hard to believe that for the money that you've paid, that they can drive as well as this. So given that and the fact that running one, maintaining one isn't very expensive at all, the quality of the driving experience and the knowledge of what you would have to pay for an equivalent German competitor, there is a sense of well-being and satisfaction that you might just have found something, a bit of a jewel in the crown that other people haven't quite cottoned on to. Not quite sure how long that will last. The market surely has to wake up to the car and the value for money on offer. Particularly given the sort of surge in Japanese car values. You know, we live in times when a Toyota Supra twin turbo manual is somewhere between £30,000 and £60,000 depending on condition. You know, an R34 Skyline could be anything up to £250,000. Subaru 22Bs for going at auction for £200,000 plus. Tommy Mackinnon edition Evolution selling for £50,000 plus. So we're in a space where having a Japanese badge on the front of your car need not hold back values. So I'm not quite sure why LS400 values are as depressed as they are, but it simply can't last forever. Gosh, this car's got to drive. I wouldn't say these cars have character in the traditional sense of the word, but my gosh, do you respect them. They do start to get under your skin. You do tend to form a sort of bond with the car. It's a respectful one. It's a thank you for being so solid and providing such a comforting and nice driving experience for the little money that I paid for you type bond. Yeah, I didn't really see that. I didn't see that coming. I thought I would stay very, very agnostic and cold towards this car, but that is not how it's panned out. So I hope that's given you some sense of what this car is like to drive. As I say, this example has done nearly 200,000 miles, so it's every right to be worn out and baggy and a handful and just provide a fairly unpleasant driving experience, and it's nothing like that at all. I really, really like this car, and if you're interested in buying one, I would highly recommend one. Get it done. We all know they're too cheap. They should be more money. So thank you for watching this video. I hope that gives you a pretty good idea of what this car's like to drive and live with on a daily basis. As I say, I try and use this as a daily driver, so yeah, and I think they're perfectly capable of doing that. A very viable proposition as such. So thank you for watching this video and supporting the channel. I'll be putting plenty more content on modern classic cars up in the not too distant future, so look forward to providing that and hopefully seeing you then. If you like what you've been watching, then please feel free to subscribe. In fact, please subscribe. This is a new channel and I've found making these videos quite time consuming actually, and quite challenging. I've learned a lot along the way, My first videos were fairly rudimentary, and I'm not suggesting that they've got too much or much better, but yeah, hopefully I've learned something along the way. You're getting something out of the content as well. There's plenty more to come. I am a habitual modern classic car collector, so yeah, there'll be plenty more to come, and I look forward to seeing you on one of the next videos. Thanks for watching.